So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining today's session on Get FTR. We're really delighted today to be joined by Professor and librarian who I'm sure needs no introduction, Lisa Hinchliffe, who is also part of the Get FTR Library Advisory Board. And also on your screens, you will see Ralph Youngen and Laird Barrett from ACS Publishers and Springer Nature, respectively, who also make up part of the Get FTR Steering Committee. Before I hand over to Lisa, just a really quick housekeeping rule, if I may. There are quite a lot of you on the call today, so we have actually put you all on mute, so please do excuse that. Any questions that you have, though, we're really keen to hear them, so please do put them in the chat box on your screen, and we will get to answer them at the end of the session. Also, just a note for those that are just joining, we will be recording today's session, so please don't feel like you need to be on video, but obviously if you'd like to be, then you're very welcome to. And any questions we don't get through today, we will leave contact details up on the screen at the end, and we're very happy to follow up with you personally after today. So many thanks, and now over to you, Lisa.
Great, and thank you, Katie, and thanks to the Get FTR team for organizing this today. Excuse me, of course, the moment I start to speak, I have to cough. I have been tracking the Get FTR initiative since its debut, and I've been happy to be part of the advisory committee for the past year and bring some of the library perspectives to the conversations, along with Elaine Westbrooks at UNC Chapel Hill, who's also serving on the group. I think one thing that's I want to just sort of situate ourselves in is the common goal that all players in this space of whether we're librarians or publishers is the degree to which we are trying to close the gap between discovery and access for our users. The degree to which when people know they have discovered something that they'd like to read, that they can know that they can get access and they know how they can get access. Next slide, please. So really kind of for me, Get FTR sort of sits in one of Ranganathan's 5 laws of librarianship, the save the time of the user, or historically save the time of the reader. So the challenge that we're collectively facing is smoothing the pathway to full text. Anyone who's done a user experience wayfinding activity or interview users know that you'll hear time and time again, just give me the blankety blank PDF. I just want the PDF. And this is true, smoothing the pathway is necessary for both subscribed content and open access content. I myself have been recently talking with some of the document delivery providers that do fee-based delivery, and they end up doing fee-based delivery of open access content because users struggle to find that final PDF, much less for that subscribed content that librarians are very familiar with helping users figure out their entitlements and pathways. So our tactic here that is really is being used with Get FTR is to improve that link that the user sees in the interface, that link that says there is full text, by improving that link to be a smart link, a Get FTR link, whatever you want to call it. For me, it's just an improved link that helps the user know that either they have an open access entitlement or they have a subscription entitlement, that they can easily follow that link. So the strategy here as well is to create a shared approach to create a consistent user experience. We know users struggle as they move from interface to interface. Codes are different, language is different, etc. So this cross-industry collaboration to help these things work similarly, so they create a kind of user experience that users don't have to think as much about the discovery and access process and can save their time for doing the work that they want to do, which is reading that text and doing their research. Now, while I've given the overview, I'm going to turn it over to my collaborators here to explain more of the technical details of how does this exactly work that we're providing this consistent user experience.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I'll take it from here. It was about a year ago that we first announced Get FTR, and at that time we made a very broad call for community participation. And I'm pleased to say that we're making steady progress here in terms of our goal of really having as much widespread participation with GetFTR as possible. We really hope that really all the scholarly publishers will eventually position their content as being available through GetFTR. And really any place that a scholar might do a literature search, to have that ability to have the signaling that GetFTR provides and the more streamlined pathways to the full text content. On this slide, we're showing those sites that are currently live and active running GetFTR at the moment, both on what we would call the integrator side on the left, those places where you would typically be doing a literature search or a collaboration environment. And on the right, the publishers that have made their content available through GetFTR. I'll say that not shown here are the large number of both integrators and publishers that are either actively working on enabling GetFTR or are in the planning stages. And we expect that we will have more announcements throughout next year on both sides of this diagram here. So if you go to the next slide. On this slide, I just want to give a very high-level overview of how GetFTR itself works. And there really are two scenarios here that this slide depicts, which I'll call the on-campus and the off-campus scenario. So if we first follow through from the left on the top here, the on-campus scenario would mean either I'm physically on campus, and I have an IP address that would be authorized as being, known to some publishers, or, today it might mean that I am on a VPN server, and so I'm virtually, on that campus network. But it also means that I might have logged in previously to a campus resource. So maybe I've already logged into my course management system. And so I have an authenticated session on campus. All of those would be kind of an equivalent starting point for the top line here. So if I'm in that kind of a situation, when I go to one of these sites that have GetFTR enabled and do a literature search, I would be able to see on that site the articles that my institution subscribes to using this icon, this GetFTR icon shown here in the middle. If I'm in that scenario, when I could simply click on the link that is provided, be taken to the publisher site, and I would be able to see the article directly with no more intervention on the publisher site. Now, when I land on the publisher site, one of two things might have happened. Either the IP address that I have was known to the publisher, and so I get access based on that IP address. Or if I'm not on an authorized IP address, I would have been routed through federated authentication to my institution, where I said, maybe I'd logged into my course management system earlier in the day and had a session already. And so the publisher site would have recognized that authenticated session on the institution and given access directly. The orange arrows here show the situation where I'm off campus, don't have an authorized IP, or I have not logged in previously to the campus before. In that situation, it's all very similar, except when I land on the first publisher's site, I am going to have to perform some kind of a login in order to prove that I am affiliated with the institution in question. So that would be a redirect to the same login page on the institution that users probably see every day when they log in to campus resources. So if you go one more slide, please. And this is just a little illustration of how GetFTR is in use today, positioned in a couple of the sites that have integrated with us. You'll see that on both of these sites, when you hover your mouse over a view PDF link here, you get this indicator saying that your institution does subscribe to this article. And if you click, that gives the user the signaling that if they click on that link, they're going to be able to have that more streamlined pathway to the full text content. And with that, Laird, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, so through this year with GetFTR, we've been we said we've been in what we've been calling sort of a pilot test phase, but really you could call it a bunch of different things. You know, you could put a different labels like beta on it or something along those lines. Really, the intention is to get the solution to a user problem out there into the community, start getting people using it and get some feedback about it. And so that's what we've been doing this year as we've been scaling up GetFTR with more discovery services and scholarly collaboration networks starting to use it, and more publishers starting to participate in GetFTR. And we've been getting feedback from obviously those discovery services and scholarly collaboration networks, and from publishers, and from researchers as well, and as well as from librarians. And really we've been taking on some of that feedback and making changes to the service on that basis. So a couple of key things that we've changed this year are when we first rolled out GetFTR, it only worked for institutions who had federated access enabled for the participating publishers. So you had to be an institution that had federated access, which you might also know as Shibboleth and Open Athens, for example, turned on with a publisher for the researchers at your institution to benefit from it, to see those GetFTR links light up on a participating discovery service, for example. One of the pieces of feedback that we got from librarians, including the librarians on the GetFTR advisory board, was that obviously enablement of federated access isn't that broad at Springer Nature. For example, I think it's actually about 10% of our institutional customers have federated access enabled with us. And it would be great to broaden out the range of institutions and institutional users who could benefit from GetFTR. And so one change that we made was support for IPE authentication through GetFTR. So if a user comes to a discovery service based on their institutional IPs, they can know on that discovery service whether they are entitled to the piece of content on the publisher's website or not. So we expanded out that range of authentication methods to really the most commonly used one, IP authentication. And that's made a big difference. We're able to serve GetFTR links and ease that authentication access journey for a much broader set of institutions and institutional users now. The other thing that we heard feedback about was what about the aggregator use case? What if I subscribe to content through an aggregator? How is that going to surface to users on a discovery service that's making use of GetFTR? And so that's another use case that we've been working on figuring out in collaboration with many of the big aggregators, ADSCO, ProQuest, Ovid, who we've been speaking with about this, and figuring out a way so that those institutions who subscribe through an aggregator and their users specifically can also have a path through that discovery service and through the responses that GetFTR is providing through to that content on the aggregator site. That's something that we're still working on, but I think we're starting to nail down the details of how that will work. And really, what we're continuing to look for is continued feedback from people about the service and how it can work, and even ideas for new use cases for how GetFTR might work. And that I suppose that's partly why we're doing events like this, is to get feedback from people. I think with that, I hand over to Katie to take us back into a question session.
Yeah, and Katie and I have just been chit-chatting behind the scenes, and I'm actually gonna maybe put some of these questions, I think, because I think I know who might best answer them. So, Ralph, you had that slide with our collaborators and our innovators on it. I'm wondering, there's a question here about, well, what about society publishers? And you being at a society, I think, are particularly attentive to that. But what about other society publishers? What about smaller publishers, smaller platforms? And then a specific question here about granting agencies with repositories, which I think probably just is a bigger question about repositories generally. So, is what's our, is this part of the path? And can you mention Chorus here as well?
Yeah, okay, sure. So, so first of all, society publishers, absolutely, I'm a society publisher, as you note. And we have one other, the American Society of Civil Engineers is actually live right now with GetFTR. And so, absolutely, this GetFTR participation is encouraged for any scholarly publisher, to come and participate, including society publishers for sure. So let's see, Lisa, you packed a lot in that question. So remind me of what part B was.
Repositories, and then I thought maybe you could also mention Chorus and the way that Chorus is using GetFTR to work with open access, public access, I guess, compliance in the US.
Yeah. So when we talk about repositories, I'm not, that's kind of a very broad category here. We would say, that GetFTR's primary appeal is to the rights holder of the work itself. Or in the case, like Laird mentioned, of the aggregator, a third party that has, distribution, rights, for the content itself. And so, whether all like other repositories would come into play right now, I think we'd really need to look at and say, is this are these original works, or is this the original source, for the content or not? I think one of the things that GetFTR is really trying to serve is to provide a streamlined pathway to the authentic, the best version of the research work itself. And so that's what we're looking to do. Chorus, yeah, we've recently announced that Chorus is using GetFTR in an interesting way to surface the open access auditing that they do for the scholarly community. It is actually quite difficult to find open access articles that are parts of hybrid journals. A pure open access journal itself, as on a title basis, can be fairly readily discovered. But in a systematic way, to really be able to surface all those more individual open access articles that might be part of a hybrid journal is a more difficult task. And Chorus recognized that GetFTR was very, very, very well suited for exactly that purpose, because on a individual DOI basis, you can make a query into GetFTR and determine the licensing status of that particular DOI directly from the publisher's, from the rights holder's, website itself. And so that's what Chorus has been, is starting to use GetFTR for that purpose, is to comb the literature and validate open access licenses for the individual publications.
Yeah, and I think with the repositories, one thing that's I certainly see being worked out here is, we have this amazing resource in the unpaywall data. And, that data is being integrated into this ecosystem as well. And there's also the question of what is done best by GetFTR versus what is done best by the discovery layer itself, where so many of that open access links are already there, but putting GetFTR and those links together is just, again, streamlining the user experience. So a user isn't presented with, here's 6 different possible links to this content, good luck, but a little bit of work behind the scenes. But I was particularly taken with the Chorus application because I don't think that was even anticipated early on. So we have a few other questions here that I think are, it's really about unpacking, where does GetFTR sit? And, it's not a link resolver. It's not this, it's not that. So it's also not an authentication mechanism. So Athena asks us, which service initiates the authentication if authentication is still needed at that point? And is that GetFTR? Is it the discovery layer?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I tried to say in my example that authentication always happens on the institution site itself, on the site that you are affiliated with. And so, GetFTR, as Laird noted, we have expanded. So GetFTR does recognize the two very prominent authentication methods in our community today. One is IP authorization, if you're from an authorized IP address, and two is via federated authentication. So, when you follow a GetFTR link to a publisher site, if you are on a known IP address, that's fine. That's how you will be authorized in order to access the content. If you are not on an authorized IP address, you will automatically be routed to your institution's, I'll say, shibboleth login page, because I think many people would probably understand what that means, where you have the ability to log in, using your institutional credentials, and that's how you would get access then.
Yeah, so Laird, you've had to deal with this specifically with integrating GetFTR into the Springer Nature site, right? So you want to add anything to that for the librarians who are sort of trying to particularly puzzle this, like, part of this, I think, is who do we ask the question of if there's a problem, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so if there is an access problem, then it's
Right.
probably best to come to the publisher to say, hi, I can't seem to get access for some reason on your website. What's going on here?
Right.
So it's probably best to come to us if there's an access problem. But yeah, so it's maybe worth pointing out as well that with GetFTR, when somebody is on their discovery site or that Scholarly Collaboration Network, for GetFTR to work so that the user can know what they're entitled to, they do have to indicate in some way what institution they're a member of. So they've got to say, hi, I'm a member of the University of Oxford, or whatever it happens to be, for that discovery service to then be able to go to GetFTR and say, hi, I've got somebody from the University of Oxford who wants to see these articles. Are they going to be entitled over on the publisher's website or not? And then, yeah, obviously, when the user then actually clicks through to get that piece of content, the actual authentication part to prove that they're an active member of the institution happens on the platform.
So to specifically answer Athena's question, it would be the content provider is saying, hey, you need to authenticate. You haven't authenticated yet, because they would recognize that, for whatever reason it says, but in many cases, the discovery layer itself is already going to have required the user to authenticate. And so if you've already gone through your Easy Proxy server to get to Web of Science or Scopus or some other database, you've already authenticated. So the GetFTR link is just going to work, because it's just going to pass that into, the Springer Nature is going to already know I have access to that content because I've already gone through Easy Proxy. I'm being essentially IP authenticated at that point. So it's not the where are you from problem. It's the do you have rights to this article problem, which I see that there's a question here about, so how is this different than seamless access? And I think I'll just repeat those two questions again. Seamless access attempts without a user already having authenticated or some other signal to say, seamless access says, hey, I think I know where you're from, and here's your authentication route. GetFTR says, you have access to this article if you click here. You might still need to authenticate for any number of reasons, but in many cases, once it already knows that you have this entitlement, you're not going to be prompted to authenticate. So the issue here is GetFTR, of course, is limited at the moment by the kinds of signals that it can get. So it's signaling for entitlement versus signaling for where you would authenticate. I think these things are very complicated to keep straight in our head, because when they work best, we actually can't quite tell what's happening. And that's always dangerous for us a little bit. So let me see here. There's a question about JSTOR in particular, but it's really a question about aggregators, right? When we have content that is provided from a different platform than the publisher themselves. And obviously this started to get access to publisher platform-based content, but Ralph, I think you're probably best situated to address the goals that we have and the progress we've made towards having aggregators be targets of GetFTR links as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the very first reactions that we got from the GetFTR announcement about a year ago is okay, what about aggregators? And I think we said right then and there, absolutely, we know we need to provide support for aggregators as well. So we've been in active conversation with the major aggregators in our community, and we see a path forward here. The challenge is that you know, any particular DOI might be served by both a publisher's platform and an aggregation site. And so the challenge from the GetFTR perspective is knowing, you know, which DOIs might also be served from an aggregator's website as well as a publisher's website. And we're working with those aggregators to add that intelligence into GetFTR so that we can provide those links to either the publisher's website or an aggregator's site. And we're going to be working with our integrators on strategies for how to make that all work. You know, I'll say this is very active discussion right now. You know, we had a workshop with aggregators just a few weeks ago, and this is absolutely, you know, something that is being developed right now. I don't have a lot of additional details to share in exactly how technically that's going to work yet, but that's the broad strokes is that, you know, we absolutely will be supporting that through GetFTR so that if your institution gets access to certain publications from an aggregator site, that would work properly through GetFTR.
Great. I think this is something that comes up a lot, I know, and boy, is it top of our mind in library world right now, right? So how much is this going to cost? Who's paying for GetFTR? Is this something a library pays for? Is this something a content integrator pays for? Who's footing the bill here? Who gets the bill?
You want to take that, Laird?
Yes, publishers are paying. So publishers fund GetFTR. So there is no cost to libraries. Obviously, the problem that we're ultimately trying to solve is researchers who have a challenge, you know, in their discovery, authentication, and access journeys, actually getting through to the content that their institution subscribes to on our site. And obviously, we believe if you subscribe to content on our site, then your users should be able to easily get through to that content. And so that's the problem that we're trying to solve. Yeah, obviously, we have an interest in the things that you subscribe to, your users actually using the content that you subscribe to. And so it's publishers who are funding GetFTR. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
I think one thing is, so publishers are funding the infrastructure piece, but then, then it's the integrators, right? This is essentially then a service to the integrator. So from librarians' perspectives, we will only start to see these links working when the integrators uptake these links.
Yeah.
So we need the Scopus, the Web of Science, the Dimensions, all these different, the user services have to uptake the service from the publishers before libraries and therefore library users will start to see these links, these smart links, if you will, showing up in the interfaces for our users.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like we just talked a little bit about integrators. So what's the integrator experience then? You know, like if I'm Lisa's database to the best literature and I want these GetFTR links to start showing up in my service. I email GetFTR and I say, hey, I want to do this, but then what's the process for me?
Yeah, I mean, that's really it, Lisa. You know, you let us know that you are interested in integrating, and then there's an API key that we would provide to an integrator to allow you to interface with the service. And then on the integrator site, it's effectively the two things that Laird mentioned earlier. You have to know what institution your user is affiliated with. So if the user does not already log in to use your service, you would have to have some means of asking the user, what institution are you from? Because we need that institutional identifier as well as the DOI or DOIs, of the articles in question. And those are the two pieces of data that are fed into the GetFTR system. It's what institution and what's the DOI. And that is what GetFTR uses to make this entitlement check to say, does someone from this institution have access to this DOI? Or is this DOI open access? Or is this DOI freely available outside of subscription access? And those are the kinds of responses that GetFTR would give back to the integrator.
So I think probably this is on even some librarians' minds, because many of us may even develop databases, locally, where I could start to imagine this being a use, if we had the capacity to use that API. I know on my own campus, we actually publish a number of A&I services for some very niche subject areas where there is no commercial indexer, but there's a campus department that publishes, the scholarship on East Asian women or something. And so there's that thing. So, I am aware that we are already at time. I know I have a few more minutes, Ralph, Laird, if you do. I don't want to impose on anyone, but it looks like there's a few more questions here that I think would benefit us. But let me just pause and say to anyone who did have 10:30 Central on their calendar that they had to leave, we are recording this and we will share this. So just feel free to drop off if you need to, but we'll just keep going a little bit longer if that's okay. So which link? I think that's an interesting question, and there's kind of a number of them here. Laird, I want to start with you. Which link do you send the user to? Are you immediately displaying the PDF, which is of course what we know the user wants, but of course just going directly to a PDF has its own challenges. So what's the target that Springer Nature has chosen? Is it the PDF or is it an interim landing page?
It's the HTML full text that we take people through to. So it is the publisher's choice whether they provide a link that goes back to the HTML full text or the PDF. I mean, the reason well, there are a couple of reasons that we chose HTML, but one of the user-driven reasons is that yes, you are right. People eventually want to get to the PDF, but it's that we've found, at least in our testing, that people have sort of an evaluation phase before they maybe actually want to get a hold of the PDF. And actually, HTML is quite nice and navigable for that evaluation phase. If what you're actually doing is still figuring out whether you're interested in this article and whether you want to read it, being able to navigate through HTML to just see the figures and tables, or jump down to the conclusion or something, is a lot easier than doing that on a PDF, particularly if you are on a mobile phone. And we have, actually on some of our websites, the majority of users are accessing via mobile now. So that was at least one of the strong drivers for us deciding to point people through to the HTML. But again, it's the publisher's choice, and some publishers will say, ultimately, most people just want the PDF, so we'll send them straight through there.
Great. Yeah, I'll just add that what we have said to publishers that join GetFTR is, while you do have the choice, like Laird just said, in terms of what rendition of full text do you point the user to, you must point the user directly to a full text rendition of some type. You can't have the user land on some registration page or put some advertisement up, or something like that. You have to commit to linking directly to the full text.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the things that also is on some librarians' minds, right? Which is that sometimes we actually have the full text from a publisher and an aggregator. And I think I can say that this is actually one of the things that's still being worked out, which is where the power of decision making will be when there is more than one, if you will, correct link. There's a correct link to an aggregator and a correct link to a publisher, and whether as the sponsoring agents, the publishers would receive priority, or if it is possible, which we're not yet sure, that a library might be able to set a priority stack, which is something that we discussed, but I'm not sure, given the technology infrastructure, I think we weren't sure exactly how that would happen. But I think there's another question here that I find comes up a lot. So do I still need a link resolver if I'm a library? And I know the answer is yes. But I think it's worth mentioning that we are also in conversation with the link resolver platforms to talk about how GetFTR can also improve the link resolver experience. Sorry, maybe I just said everything there is to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of did cover it there. You know, we do recognize that the link resolvers also provide another pathway to the full text, and you know, GetFTR could be used, you know, in alongside of those pathways as well. So, and you're right, Lisa, those are things that we are actively, you know, working out right now in terms of how that all plays out.
Yeah, I think just to add, I think the powerful thing about GetFTR is the API shows you what a user actually fully has access to on a publisher's website, right? So obviously the things you subscribe to, but it also has stuff like content that we have made freely available for a period of time for marketing reasons, for example, which might be a fairly significant volume of stuff, you know, open access articles and hybrid journals, all of that sort of stuff. All of that is accurate. The entitlement from the user is accurately reflected from the API, which can be difficult if you're using you know, KBART files and a knowledge base and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I have to say I had seen that acronym KBART files many times in my life, but I have come to a way new level of appreciation for them and what is them and what is not them. Okay, so is GetFTR similar to browsing? So I am not personally familiar with browsing. I don't know if Ralph or Laird is able to answer that, or we might need to put that onto our get back to it and follow up with you.
Yeah. Well, the developer of Browsine is actively involved in GetFTR, and so Browsine is a platform that, you know, could leverage GetFTR, you know, for some of the entitlements checking, you know, that we've been describing here. So they're a potential integrator, I guess I would say.
Great. And okay, so now that we've gotten this figured out, there are now these discovery layers like the that actually integrate discovery for books, articles, etc., into one platform. That would be like the Primo Alma from Ex Libris. So I think what I can say is, in cases where there are articles indexed, then Primo Alma would be eligible to become an integrator, because they would have the DOIs and they could potentially do integration. So that is, you know, that is really up to Primo Alma as an integrator. So I guess if I could speak for a moment to my colleagues as librarians, if you want these GetFTR links to show up in your integrator interfaces, we as librarians need to ask, I think, our integrator platforms and say, hey, we hear that the publishers are making this service available to you, which would improve the experience for our users. Would you please consider integrating these links into the user experience of our users on your platform? So this is, you know, I think this is also where this understanding, like which players have which kinds of decision making in this. The publishers can make this available, they can make it work on their platforms, but if we want it in the integrator platforms, we have to be part of the ask. and saying that as customers, we would like to see these. I think the other thing that since I am somebody who's raised these concerns, but no one's asked it, so I'll ask it myself. One of the things I have come to appreciate as well is that, getting access to that API requires agreeing to certain terms. And some of the early librarian terms around the privacy of this data, I think, are addressed in that API agreement. But I wonder, Ralph, maybe if you want to talk about, the sort of the agreements that sit behind this just generally I'm not looking for us to actually look at the contract, but you can't just get this key and start doing whatever you want with it.
No, we do, so first of all, we, as I said earlier, we encourage very widespread participation. So, it's not like we're trying to be a real, we're not trying to get FTR itself does not want to be in a position where we are deciding, whether this integrator is worthy or not of participating. That's not what we're about at all. So, but what we do have, you're right, any service like this will have a set of terms, that integrators will need to agree to. And honestly, those terms are we haven't even finalized yet. We've been, running for the last year in this pilot mode, and the integrators that we are working with are working with us, on a more loose basis at this moment. But I think it's important to note that the nature of the data that's being exchanged through GetFTR really is that very high level, what is your institution and what is the DOI? That really is the only data that is being transmitted, back and forth through GetFTR. So I know this is complex, but the authentication workflows that I talked about are really not part of GetFTR itself. The authentication takes place directly with, between an institution and a publisher site, like in the case of federated authentication. And GetFTR is not involved in that at all. It's totally independent. So that's a point I know that's often confusing, but I just want to point out that is how that works.
Yeah, I think that's, as I said, I think I've just come to appreciate sort of the degree to which sometimes it can seem like it's just one thing, and really there's 7 different initiatives that are all coming together, and where you want the data to come from, the degree to which link resolvers often operate, since they operate off KBART files, they operate at the title of the journal level, as opposed to the DOIs, which operate at the article level. So, the fact that GetFTR links operate at the article level, this specific DOI, as opposed to, in many cases, the link resolvers, which the first look the user gets the date stuff gets really complicated. It's not operating at that identifier level where we can get that nice control over the mapping. I'm sure there's plenty of things that don't work perfectly, but yeah. So what about the accuracy question here, right? So with our link resolvers, we get some sense of, when things aren't matching because we see those KBART files, et cetera. What would be if a library wanted to sort of test if the GetFTR links were working properly? That would really be between the library and the publisher, because the publisher is the one populating those links, right? Laird, can you think about how you'd see this happening? I don't know if you see Athena's question in the chat there.
It is a good question. So yes, ultimately the entitlements information that GetFTR is using is based on what's on the publisher platform. It's just sort of like a proxy for that, essentially, that brings those responses together across publishers. So if it looks like if it looks like there is an incorrect GetFTR response, then maybe it is best to at least, I don't think we've sorted out all the details of that, but it's probably best to speak to the publisher to start with. I think there is an interesting use case with the GetFTR API that we haven't fully explored, which is its possible use to check entitlement for an institution on a publisher's platform and to find and look for gaps there. That's something that it could potentially be used for, right? That you could, it will give you those types of responses. So it's not a use case that we've fully explored yet, but it could be turned into a tool to do those kind of checks. And I think Ralph mentioned earlier that Chorus is making use of the API to check what content is open access on publishers' platforms at the moment. So it has that kind of potential, I think.
I think the other thing that I might be wrong or not, but I think the very early release of what is GetFTR also suggested that users would be told that they didn't have access. And I want to sort of say that I am quite pleased personally that I feel that GetFTR has decided that they will focus for the moment on you do have access. And there will not be there was a green light, red light discussion in the very first press releases where you would get a red saying you don't have access. And I think everyone has come to realize that that would be a very dangerous signal to begin sending to users. And so the other thing I think that's really important to know is that if there isn't a GetFTR link, the user will still get a regular link to the platform. And so if for some reason or another that entitlements check to their institution didn't happen because the platform didn't know their institution, then they're just going to get a regular link through your link resolver or whatever other link you would usually have in that platform. So for what it's worth, as your librarian, one of your librarian reps on the advisory committee, and I think Ralph and Laird will attest to this, every time somebody thinks of sending up a negative signal, I throw my arms in the air and sort of say, that is really not what you ought to be doing. So I think everyone has come to see that maybe we don't have the data controls that we would really need to have, or the accuracy yet, or the full uptake of this to begin even considering sending people to alternative copy.
Yeah, I mean, what GetFTR is all about, trying to provide users with the best version that they are entitled to based upon their institutional entitlement. And so in those, you're right, Lisa, we have not yet, when we announced GetFTR, we did say that we would be doing some experimentation with these alternative versions for those unentitled use cases. With COVID and everything this year, I think we've all kind of put that a little bit more on the back burner. We're still doing some thinking about that and thinking about how that could be positioned as options. But I would emphasize, the option part there, as, if we do some experimentation along these lines, how some of those alternative versions could be positioned to users as options, and that the integrators would be free to position that within their interfaces as they see fit. So I think that's what we've said about, when we plan to start doing some experimentation there, that's how that would be positioned.
Yeah. So right now it's only about lighting up green lights and, some of those other concerns, because I think that was a major concern for libraries, particularly around the aggregator use case, right? Telling somebody that we didn't have access to something that we actually literally were paying for just really made us a little, well, it made us a little irritated. So I think, we have gone quite a bit past, but I think what this tells us is maybe a half an hour isn't enough time for, I think, the degree to which this really, is an important issue. So I'll let Athena get the last question in here, which is, so what about sort of just like errors that happen? I think this would not be tracked by GetFTR, but rather the publisher, right? Where the publisher would see that they were receiving a GetFTR link that then did not resolve.
So that's so if you're wondering about the case where does GetFTR track whether the link goes to a successful landing page, for example? Does it know if the user sees an error page or a paywall? Do you track success? So I don't think there's so not at the moment, no, is sort of the brief answer to that. I don't think there's a case where someone would see an error page necessarily, but you know, if there was some kind of inaccurate entitlement, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm rambling through this question. My apologies, Athena. So I think the responses that are coming back from a GetFTR are an accurate representation of what the user is entitled to on the publisher's website. And so I don't think we have, you know, we measure, you know, how the GetFTR service itself is working and that sort of thing. But I don't think there's really a case where a user would come through to and see something that they weren't expecting on the publisher's website. That's not a case that we're expecting or tracking. I guess there is that other possibility that the entitlements on the publisher's side are wrong for some reason, and that's sort of a different scenario. In which case, you know, something needs to be fixed in the data on the publisher's side, and it's best to talk to the publisher about it.
Yeah, and that would be, yeah. So I think it's important here. GetFTR cannot track whether the links are successful on the publisher site or not. GetFTR is not involved in those transactions at all. So there is no ability for GetFTR to track success or failure on the publisher site. That would have to be directly a conversation between the institution and the publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to give Katie Baker as particularly, and our other support teams here, the chance to have this conversation in public, I think is really important. I can't thank enough to all of the folks who have asked any number of questions. I hope that I did not miss any, but I also know that we have captured them in a document and we'll be using them to improve our FAQ, as well as to inform future sessions like this. So I think with this, I turn it over to Katie to quite literally wrap us up.
Wrap you up. Thank you very much, Lisa, Laird and Ralph, and thank you to you all for joining, and apologies for going over. As Lisa said, I think we definitely need more than half an hour for any future sessions that we do. Just to reiterate what Lisa has said, we have tracked all of your questions. We will be updating our FAQs, and any resources that we already have on our site, we will share with the recording of this webinar. And I think some of those will already talk to some of the questions that have been answered and asked. But many thanks to you all for joining. Happy festive period to you all, and have a great rest of your days or evenings.